And now I'd like to introduce our club member, Eric Corning, with a classification of cultural institutions. Eric has been acquainted with our featured speaker for many years. Eric, the podium is yours, sir.
Thank you, Jimmy. Steve Raible is a longtime broadcaster and original Seattle Seahawk. He has been a fixture in the Pacific Northwest for almost a half a century. He is the trusted face and voice of Cairo 7 News for almost 30 years, and after retiring in 2020, the station named its news broadcast facility the Steve Raible Studio. Steve continues to be the voice of the Seahawks as the team's radio play-by-play announcer, as a job he's held since 2004. He's filled the role of color analyst for 22 years before that. Raible's called the biggest games in the franchise history, including the team's Super Bowl 48 championship over the Denver Broncos. During his time at the CBS affiliate, Raible anchored all the station's main daily newscasts, hosted Emmy Award-winning documentaries, and led the news team's election coverage and major breaking news stories. He is a multiple Emmy Award winner, including Best Anchor. For more than 2 decades, he was the voice of Cairo 7's coverage of Seafair, Seattle's summer festival, including the 4th of July, Torchlight Parade, and Blue Angels Air Show. Raible entered broadcasting in 1982 following a 6-year career as a wide receiver with Seattle Seahawks. A second-round draft choice of the expansion franchise in 1976, Raible came to Seattle after graduating from Georgia Tech. Steve's been married to his bride Sharon since 1981, and together they've helped raise millions of dollars for countless charities across the Northwest.
I guess that's my cue, Eric.
That is your cue. Great to see you, Steve.
If there's one thing I remember after having retired for a year, it's a cue. When they point at you, you start talking. Hi, everybody. Yes, thank you for that. Hi, everybody, and thank you for taking time out to visit for just a few minutes. Thanks for the invitation. Normally I can't, now that I'm retired, I can't get relatives to call me and want to chat. So to be called by Rotary and say, hey, would you stop in and chat with us for a few minutes? That's a real treat. By the way, I don't know where our singers went. They're not on my screen. I hope they're still there, but hang on one second. I have mine here too. And this was the ball we all with the organization received after the Super Bowl championship. This stays in a place of honor right here in the den. And it reminds me of a 43-8 Seahawks win over the Broncos. And it reminds me how if there's one thing that is true always about football, from the day I got into the National Football League in 1976 through to today, and will still be true 25 years from now, and that is, it is hard to get to that game. It's even harder to win it. And so when you have that championship on your shelf, if you're the Seattle Seahawks and you're Pete and all those players, good on you, because it's really tough. Ask Russ. He's watched guys get to the Super Bowl ahead of him, Tom Brady being probably the biggest name of guys getting there ahead of him many times since he's had his 2 opportunities. So I can tell you that these guys are really hell-bent for leather to get back to the Super Bowl. So I guess what we're going to do is I'll chat for just a couple of minutes, and then Ken, you'll field a few of the questions and you'll pass them on to me. First of all, it takes a lot of guts to sing on Zoom. It takes a lot of guts to sing in practice, sing in public anywhere. So to sing on Zoom for all of us here, I thank those nice folks. I'm going to spare you any sort of warbling at this point. I also wanted to mention, because I saw this in the newspaper, that Lee Raible passed. And it is the same pronunciation, but a different spelling. R-A-B-E-L was a distant derivation of R-A-I-B-L-E. I came from the Louisville, Kentucky area many years ago, but there was a Unitarian minister who came here to the Northwest, part of our family, and settled in the University District, Peter Raible. He had a son named Steve who was a musician, my age, and after big games, he used to get people buying him drinks thinking he was me. So that was a great deal for him. I never got any liquor out of it, but I'm happy that he had a great time with it. Let's see, what else can I tell you? Well, let me just jump right in as we get set to start our 46th. Show of hands. How many were there from the beginning? How many remember? I know Carl does. Yeah, Mike, you do, Michael. 46 years now as starting this season. And probably a few of you remember going over to Cheney back in 1976, our very first training camp. And I try to forget that, but unfortunately it keeps coming back in nightmares over and over again. Probably the most difficult thing I've ever been through in my life, maybe other than my audition for Cairo. But it was just a different time then in playing and practicing football. Whole different deal now. Part of it is because of the money. Part of it is because of how they take care of players today. But we practiced twice a day, hitting all the time. And I think we've learned a lot that you don't need to hit as much as we used to, but they've learned a lot. A quick question. So 1976 is our first season. We're coming up on our season opener this Sunday in Indianapolis against the Colts. How many remember our season opener in 1976? Do you remember who we played in the regular season opener, not the preseason opener, but the regular season opener in 1976? Anybody? Everybody's all muted anyway. I couldn't hear you even if you knew.
Feel free to put it in the chat.
Oh, okay.
Feel free to use the chat.
Yeah, okay. I'll give people a chance to use the chat, which I know nothing about. Let me see. I don't see anything on there yet. I will tell you. It was the St. Louis Cardinals in the Kingdome. Remember, the Kingdome was virtually new at that point. There'd been a Sounders game and a couple of concerts, and then the Seahawks go in there in September of 1976. We played the St. Louis Cardinals. Anybody remember who the two starting wide receivers were that game? Of course not. Why would you? I wouldn't either if I hadn't been one of them. I started that game along with a guy named Don Clune, who we got in the expansion draft from the New York Giants. A guy named Steve Largent had only been with us for about 3 weeks, so he didn't start that game. Sam McCullum was the backup wide receiver to me. He didn't start that game either. He was a veteran from the Vikings. McCullum caught 2 touchdown passes in that game. Largent caught about a half a dozen passes, and I was on special teams for the rest of my career. So that kind of gave you an idea of what the opening to the 1976 season was like. But it was great fun. And so now, going on 5 decades later, we're still with this team and excited for what they have done over the years. And all through all the coaches that I've had a chance to work with, from Jack Patera, God rest his soul, and Chuck Knox, again, the same, great guys, right on through Mike Holmgren, our first Super Bowl, and then, of course, Pete Carroll and what he and John have done in the last decade or so. So it's been terrific just to be a part of that. As we get set to start our 46th season, there are a lot of things you're going to see about this football team that are the same, that you have loved about this team for the last 10 years, 11 years, 12 years. Not the least of which is the guy who wears the number 3 jersey, who is still leading our team. There was some, a little bit of verklempt in the offseason about, does Russ really want to come back and does he want to be a part of this team? Yes, and he is, and he will be for the duration, and he will continue to set records. Last season, a personal best, 40 touchdown passes. I mean, that's up there in Peyton Manning territory. And this is in an offense that Pete really wants to run the ball as much as he throws the ball. So it gives you an idea of just how effective Russell really is. 12-4 last year, NFC West champions. Unfortunately, we took one, a really tough loss at home in the playoff game against the Rams. That might have hurt as much as any loss, well, certainly since the loss to the Patriots in the Super Bowl down in Arizona. But that playoff loss, this team believed that they were ready to make a big move, and we just couldn't get anything going. So I think there were some things they learned in that game and some changes that they made, not the least of which was offensive coordinator. And I think you'll see an offense that's a little more flexible, one that is more quick to change, more quick to respond to what a defense does, and more able to make plays in situations where, man, we just can't figure these guys out up front defensively. You got the Rams, they're tough guys. Okay, here's what we need to do. So new offensive coordinator, new running game coordinator, some couple of new players up front on the offensive line, some help in the wide receiver categories. And I think with that, you have Chris Carson, you bring him back as a running back. And of course, DK Metcalf, who's everybody's choice for climbing off the bus first without a shirt on. That just scares every foe on the planet to death. And he is just a remarkable football player. And one of my personal favorites. And he doesn't get as much press because he's just such a quiet-spoken guy. But Tyler Lockett is a playmaker supreme. He's gotten to know my wife a little bit because she's come down and chatted with him after games down on the field. We're doing a post-game show. And even after a tough loss, he came over and he put his arm around her and he said, "Mrs. Raible, it's all good." And you know what? He's just got such a great attitude about life. He's written poetry. He's a remarkable young man. And he also happens to be able to catch passes for over 1,000 yards. And he set a new franchise record last season with 100 receptions. So he's the kind of guy that you want on your football team. And he is back and he is healthy. So that's kind of the offensive thing. My spotting board, this is what I use in the broadcast booth. I'm going to fill it in, put all the notes on it as we get set for the game. But as I look down the list, one of the things that I've noticed is after the start of last season, and you guys remember this too, we couldn't get out of our own way on defense. We couldn't stop anybody. I think we gave up an average of 30 points through the first 8 games of the season. Per game, giving up an average of 30 points. The plus was we won 6 of those 8 games because we outscored the other guys. And then things started to flip. And we figured out how to put pressure on the quarterback. And that said, Pete brought back guys like Carlos Dunlop and Benson Mayowa. He's gotten some more help out of Alton Robinson. Jamal Adams is healthy this year, maybe one of the best strong safeties in all of football. So I think you're going to see a team defensively that is built around bringing pressure. The back end safeties, they're all pros. The cornerbacks were still a little bit in flux on that. We're going to have a couple of guys who are going to start. Trey Flowers, DJ Reed, both have been starters in the past, but we're going to have, I think, a little more depth. There's a rookie that the Seahawks really like, Trey Brown. He's hurt right now, but he should be back in a couple of weeks, and he'll be ready to play. But with Jamal and Quandre Diggs at safety, you always got help back there. And then, of course, the All-Pro, a guy who's going to be not only in our Ring of Honor one day, but almost certainly in the Pro Football Hall of Fame is Bobby Wagner, right in the middle, calling all the defensive signals. So we should be better defensively, at least from the start of the season. In the back half of the season, we had more sacks in the last 8 games than any team in the league. I don't know if we can do that again, but if we can just start faster defensively and then kind of hold our own on offense, make some plays, convert third downs, I think you're going to see the kind of team that is going to be there at the end, going to be there competing for the NFC West title, and will, I think, of course, injuries is always the big deal here, but I think if you can take care of staying healthy, this team is going to be there at the end and should be playing deep into the playoffs, not just the first round, but deep into the playoffs. So those are a couple of thoughts that I have. That's the actual football part. Let me give you a little bit bigger picture of what's going on right now. For those of you that remember last season, and I know you do, none of you were there, at least for home games. We couldn't, no fans in the stands. It was the weirdest thing I think I've ever been through. Probably second only to broadcasting a game while the team was in Philadelphia or Miami or Atlanta, while I was still at Lumen Field in our broadcast booth. The league has kept the bubble around the team very small because of COVID, even though everybody, I think all but 2 players on the Seahawks are vaccinated. Everybody in the organization is vaccinated. Certainly I am. All of our broadcast crew is vaccinated. But the league is keeping the bubble small, so they're only allowing a certain number of players and personnel in the organization on the team playing. So as it stands right now, at least for the first half of the season, we're going to be doing the games again, the broadcast crew, from here in Seattle. So they open this week in Indianapolis, and I'll be right here doing the games with Dave Wyman and our crew at the stadium here in Soto. I'm torn about that a little bit, but I'd much rather do that if I can't travel with the team, because many of you who know me and you know my wife Sharon, who has lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, so she is immune suppressed, and the last thing I want to do is go traipsing through airports and sitting on planes 18 times a year or 12 times a year and then coming back home, even though I've had all of the vaccines and I wear a mask, even when I had it on right before we got on here, just sitting in the house by myself. So we're very careful, but these days you can't be too careful. And remember, now that we're all wide open and we expect to have 65,000 people at Lumen Field in 2 weeks when the Titans come to town for the home opener, mask mandate in effect. You must show proof of COVID vaccine or proof of a negative COVID test within 72 hours of arriving at the stadium. And that's everybody. And I just saw somewhere, somebody just wrote the article that, and if you don't do that and you don't present a card, you're not vaccinated, none of those things, then you're not going to get into the game and you're not going to get a refund for your tickets. You have time enough now to understand what is expected here. We're probably tougher than almost any place in the country right now. And there's a reason for that. And we want to keep everybody healthy. So I know you guys, for those of you that are going to come to the games, I know you'll be prepared. And for the rest of you who are going to watch it on TV, I encourage you to turn the sound down and to turn on the radio and figure out how to, which I still can't do, how to get that balance in there, because we're always usually ahead of the TV. So if you can figure that out, you're way smarter than I am. And as I look around the grid, I'm the dumbest person in the room. I can tell you that right now as I'm looking around the grid. So there you go. That's all I know about Seahawks. I got a couple of more minutes and then we were going to take questions, but I think I'd rather just sort of open it up to, one more thing I was going to mention. The last time we were in Indianapolis we lost in Indy to the Colts, 34-28. I remember that game. It was a tough game. They made a number of big plays against our defense, which surprised me. That year was 2013. We didn't lose many games that year. We were 13-3 and went all the way through and won the Super Bowl. So you know what? If we go back to Indianapolis to start the season and we come out of it on the short end, I'm not going to sweat that too much, because history says this team understands how to recover, and especially an AFC game early in the season is not going to hurt you later in the season, especially as the standings fall. And you can find out some things about yourself early on that maybe you didn't know, and some things you need to work on to get ready. But I know these guys are going to be ready to go out there and play on Sunday in Indianapolis. So those are my thoughts on the team. I'd love to open things up for a couple of minutes to some questions. And I have one other thought before we finish, but I want to wait till after I answer a couple of questions on football or anything else, broadcasting, being retired. As I look around the grid here, I'm looking at a few folks that I know for a fact are successfully ensconced in retirement life, and God bless all of you, and I'm happy to join you.
Can you honestly use the word retirement? You sound busier than anybody on this call today.
Yeah, Ken, it's funny. During the off season, Sharon and I, we tried to do some things that we could do, and still stay safe. And we took the whole family 4th of July. We went down to the Oregon coast and sat out there and had sand blow in our face for 10 days with the family on the beach, and it was great. But now that football's here, you're usually I've got things to do with the Seahawks 3 times a week. I was doing radio with Indianapolis this morning. So we stay busy, and that's good, because I love doing this. And it's sometimes I have to pinch myself and remember that for 42 years, I did both those jobs. 38 years. I did football, which is really kind of a full-time job for 6 months a year. And then the other job, anchoring 3 to 4 newscasts a day, 5 days a week, plus all the other specials, things like Seafair. Gosh, I meant to mention that, Eric. I have missed Seafair so much. I don't miss the daily grind of TV newscasts as much, but I sure miss what we did at Seafair every year, working with Eric and going back and Beth and all those who've been involved with Seafair over the years. We'd go out there for 10 hours all day Sunday without a script, and it was the most fun television that you can do. And I thought the technicians, the guys at Cairo who put it all together, we threw a team of like 100 people at that every year. And that part I miss. But yeah, we're staying busy, Ken.
I can only imagine. All right, so there's a lot of geeky questions, which I personally don't understand. So forgive me, because we got a football guy and an Aussie. The football guy and an Aussie walk into a bar, the first they're going to do is drink. No pressure, Steve, but can you tell us your take on the fateful decision to try a slant pattern pass on the doorstep of the goal line in lieu of using beast mode to punch it in? It's like Dutch to me. Coach Pete took the heat, but is there anything else you can share about how we let the Pats snatch victory from the jaws of defeat?
Yeah.
Forgive me.
Man, I thought I'd heard that. I thought I'd heard the end of those questions like a half a decade ago. But yeah, there is one thought that I had. I have no problem with the call, because quite frankly, the Patriots did the same thing earlier in the quarter and scored on the play. Everybody's piled up inside. We're down on the goal line, or they're down on the goal line, and they throw a little outside, another slant and touchdown for the Patriots that got them back in the game. So I have no problem with the call. The issue I had with the call is the personnel setting we had, and we didn't have our best receiver in that position to make that catch. And while Lockett, the different Lockett, got knocked off the ball. He was a great special teams player, but he got knocked off the ball by the defensive back who as soon as he read that, he made a beeline for the ball. You as a receiver have to go in there knowing I'm going to get clobbered, and I got to get big, and I got to be big and shield this ball off and hang on to the catch. He didn't. Russ threw the ball right on the money. Could have been just a touch lower, so only he could get it. But it was the execution of the play, not the call, in my estimation.
Speaking of which, I'm going to ask a quick question for myself. Do you ever, when you're broadcasting, do you ever want to just scream through the microphone and say, listen, that's not how I would have done it. You should do it this way?
Well, for those of you that have heard me do the broadcast, you know I scream anyway, and for at the craziest times. But I try not to say I would do something or this is what I think for a couple of reasons. There is not a chance on the planet that I'm any smarter and ever hope to be at deciding what should be done on the field than Pete Carroll and his assistant coaches and the players who are out there. I always said, and I used to hear guys back in the day who would kind of criticize players. Well, he's not very good or whatever. And I always used to say, I was never good enough to be able to say somebody else is not good. I will defend trying to understand and explain why something did or didn't happen. But just to come out and say, hey, I don't like this guy or whatever, I just never thought that was terribly effective.
All right.
So yeah, I've tried to keep my personal feelings out of it. Now, a couple of times that's tough to do, but no, for the most part, I just try to explain it. I let my analysts now, Dave Wyman, do those kinds of explanations.
Yeah, and you do a good job, by the way.
Thank you.
Which I'll come back to in a second. Steve, you've made a lifetime career in Seattle. This is from our good member, birthday boy, Kirk Green, by the way. Happy birthday to you. And loved by the fans as both a player and newsman. What advice would you give to other players about the benefits of staying in Seattle instead of seeking opportunities elsewhere?
Well, that's a great question because it does involve both football and other opportunities outside of football. The difference is the big dollar sign today. Today, players can earn more in a single year on average than most of us made in our careers. Now, granted, I came into the league 40 plus years ago, 46 years ago. And things have changed. Many of you as business owners know salaries have gone up in that time. Well, they've really gone up in football. So for a guy who has an opportunity to perhaps play at another team, become a free agent, there was always that. Well, first of all, there was no free agency. And many of us back in the day thought, we came to a team, and especially here in Seattle, the very first year, the city embraced us. They hadn't had football here professionally. And so we could do no wrong. We won 2 games my rookie year, 2-12, and you'd have thought we were Super Bowl champions. So being in this city meant so much to so many of us, guys who came here and stayed here. I came from back east. I can think of Sam McCullum and Sam Adkins and Norm Evans, who came here from the Dolphins in Miami. All of us came here and stayed all these decades later. Now, because of free agency and because you can make so much money as a player, and you don't have to stay in a community to think about what's my next job going to be. Most of these guys don't have to have a next job. If you're even remotely smart about protecting your money today, you'll be set. And so then you can kind of pick and choose, and you can work wherever you want to work. Me, I knew I had made my bones here, and I got to know people like Carl and others early on, and stayed in the community and got to do a lot of charity events, which led to being at Cairo on the radio and then TV, and then led to my retirement to take the job at Channel 7, as a matter of fact.
It's interesting. I just got to do a gig the other day with Jermaine and Jordan. Those are 2 dudes that did well here and still remain here.
Mm-hmm.
All right, another geeky question. To give Russell some extra time, do you think there will ever be a hybrid position of 6 offensive linemen fullback to hang back and pick up the blitz or double up on the player like a Donald?
That's a good question. And there are ways to accommodate that offensively. Normally on offense, you have 5 offensive linemen, a center, 2 guards, 2 tackles. Back in the day, again, the tight end was a guy who was generally a big, strong guy, maybe not as fast, had pretty decent hands, could run some pass routes, could help out on the pass catching part of things, but mostly was depended on as another blocker up on the offensive front. That position has sort of evolved because the athletes have gotten so much better that now you have a lot of guys who are Jimmy Graham type athletes who are amazing, big, strong, tall, but can run and can catch. They're like a wide receiver in a tight end's body. And you'd rather have those guys out in the pattern as opposed to hanging back and blocking, although you still need to block some. So what you do is you have different types of tight ends. We have a guy named Will Dissly right now from University of Washington. Many of you know. Will can catch the ball, but he's also as good a blocking tight end as there is in the league right now. The other thing you can do is take a tight end out and bring another tackle in. And now you have 2 guards, a center, and 3 tackles. We did that with a guy named George Fant and did it very, very well for a few seasons. And then he went off and made a fortune playing for the Jets. So there are things you can do. There's also back in the day, and this was developed more by the Washington football team, a hybrid position they called the H-back. It was a tight end hybrid, but they put him in the backfield or in a wing position so he could either block for the quarterback, catch passes, and that was one of those kind of guys too who could help with protection. But I think the biggest thing you can do to help Russell in protection, get the ball out of his hands faster. 3 steps, boom, get rid of the football. Look for those receivers, quick slants, quick outs, pump fake, throw deep, and that way you protect him without having to hold extra guys back in.
Okay. Got a couple of minutes left, and I want to leave you 1 minute to give your last remark too.
Oh,
so
okay.
Where the fox hat is Warren Moon? That's a question. I'm literally repeating a question.
I got you. Warren is obviously he's not on our broadcast anymore, and that's that's unfortunate. There were some decisions that were made between Warren and the football team, but he has been. You talk about me being busy. He's been crazy busy. He's between up here and he's got a business in California, and then being a member of the Hall of Fame is almost like a full-time job. He's always, and now, of course, with COVID, with travel restrictions last year, kind of slowed things down. but there are just about every week in every city around the National Football League, there are events honoring Hall of Famers, because in so many cities, you're inducting a new member maybe of their team into the Hall of Fame. So they have Hall of Famers that literally kind of travel around, and they don't do that for free. I mean, Warren is a great guy with giving of his time. Trust me, with so many charities that he works for, but that can be a lucrative position. The other thing I'll say about Warren is, and he helps with quarterback camps. When I used to walk down onto the field, and Carl couldn't tell you because we'd see each other down on the field before the game. We'd walk down and we'd walk over to the sidelines and generally talk to Pete, or who, back in the day, Jimmy Mora, whoever was, Mike Holmgren, and players before the game. And the other team, I swear it happened every time. Players and coaches from the other team would come over to talk to Warren. Warren Moon he is so much bigger than we sometimes remember here in Seattle, because he is literally, when it comes to quarterbacks in the National Football League, he was one of the pioneers and set the table for so much of what we see today. And so they all wanted to come over and meet him. I'll never forget, we're in Green Bay doing a game, and Brett Favre, who they knew each other pretty well, Brett Favre walks over and is talking to Warren. I'm just sort of standing there like Warren's little kid, kind of standing off to the side like this. And Warren said, "Oh, by the way, this is my broadcast partner. Hi, Mr. Favre, how are you?" So, those were the kinds of relationships that he had and has. And I'm tickled for him, and I miss him. There's some things I can't do anything about, but I know he's just very successful.
Okay. We've run out of time, but I knew you had one last thought.
Yeah.
Throw it at us.
Yeah, and because it was mentioned earlier, I think perhaps by President Jimmy at the time, and I hadn't noted it, and I wanted to. We are all thinking about this being the opening weekend of the National Football League, and that's great, and we're all happy about that. But it is also the 20th anniversary of 9/11, and it reminded me that how much more important events like that are, and how long-lasting they are in our memories, as opposed to just about everything else that we can talk about today, football or otherwise. And the reason I remember so vividly is because we played the New York Jets in 2001 in New York at the Meadowlands in December after September 11th. And so we went back to broadcast the game. And back at that time, a guy named Ron Callan, who used to work with me at Cairo TV, Ron Callan was our sideline reporter. And Ron and I left from our hotel and decided to walk down to the area of the Twin Towers where they used to be. And it was, all the Christmas decorations are up. This is December. And so there were people, moving about the city. But the further, downtown you got, the quieter it got. And we arrived at the little chapel that was right there in the shadow of what was the World Trade Center. And it had a black wrought iron fence around it. And on that fence were posted literally thousands of photographs. Have you seen? Do you know? We miss RIP. And we just sort of stood there and we looked at that fence for, I can't tell you how long. And people, in the city, they had been there, they had done that, they were walking by, but a few of us just stood and looked. And we walked around the other side of the fence where there was a big gate. And just beyond that gate were floodlights, and that's where the in effect, burial pit was for the World Trade Center. And the work was going on 24/7 to clear that area. And there was a police officer standing right by the gate. I'm sorry for taking so much time, but this story was one that I remember so vividly. And I said to the police officer, I said, "Sir, we're here from Seattle. We're calling the game for the Seahawks. And we just want to say thank you for your service. And we're so sorry for everything that you guys went through." And he couldn't have been nicer. And he said, "Do you want to come in?" And I said, "I beg your pardon?" He said, "Would you like to come inside the gate?" And we said, "Yeah." So he opened the gate and let us in, and we didn't get very far, but we're looking at this area where 3,000 people lost their lives, and where there was heavy equipment, but there were still people, steel workers and firefighters and union members down in that pile digging by hand every day, 24 hours a day. And it just sort of gave us pause. Mike Holmgren went the same day, earlier in the day, was escorted down there and visited with a couple of the team captains at the time, and came away with the same feeling about how awe-inspiring those people are for continuing their lives the way they are, and how resilient we are as a country, and how important it is that we never let things like that happen again, and how us being together on a Sunday to play football is really a blessing, considering what many others have dealt with in their lives. I see some hats. We have veterans here with us today. Thank you for your service. So I just wanted to bring that up, that it's one of those things that I'll be thinking about on Sunday as we get set to broadcast the game.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. I know I've taken way more of your time than I deserve. I really appreciate it. I hate doing Zooms, but I love talking to people like you. So thank you.
Thank you for being here, Steve. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ken.
All right, so a quick shout out for you, real quick. We have donated 600 healthy servings of produce to families in Washington State in your honor through our good friends over at Harvest Against Hunger, a Rotary District hunger relief program. Thank you again for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, on with the show. See if I can do this in 30 seconds or not. Quick shout out to our big sponsors, Liz Powell, Bob Alexander, Joel Farrell, Dominic Masafia, our good friends over at Jacobson Jarvis and Company, and our dear friend Matt